Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Doing in reverse. Greetings and salutations.
Happy Monday.
Yeah, and happy Monday. We throw that in there because my name is Tristan Watty, and this is the Safe Room featuring security side quests. So I might add a welcome and also another hello to the marvelous, the magnificent, the marvel. I always like to separate it. Why? Maybe stick around and find out one day. Russ.
How you doing today?
I'm doing all right. It's Monday, like you said. So we'll go from there, right? But I also want to go from the spot of saying hello to everybody to start off with. Victor. Mel, thank you. We're doing just awesome today. Thanks for asking. And for you new joiners, feel free to say hi in the chat. And also, let us reintroduce ourselves. My name is Tristan Watty. I come to you from the AWS Professional Services Division, where we help to accelerate customers' journey to the cloud in a secure manner. And Russ, where do you come from?
I come from the Customer Incident Response Team. We help customers mitigate and contain their security incidents.
Yes. And with that being said, feel free to have some fun today. And also tell us where you are from. That is what we like to see, hear, or even see again. 2 C's, right? That's how we kind of play that. But as always, feel free to also answer our second question. And what is that second question? Well, it's an interesting one. Because if you're a gamer, you know this. Or maybe you don't. But what is your favorite video game cheat code? This is a fun question because you always see what decade of video games you grew up on, and then two, what video games were you playing? But Russ, where do you go first with this?
So I'm gonna have to go with my most cheat code used game. Because most of the time I try not to be a dirty cheater because it kind of ruins the game. But for Grand Theft Auto, I was thinking specifically 3 because that was the one that I started with. But the Raise Star cheat in Grand Theft Auto is my favorite game cheat code by far.
That is a good one. That is a classic, and it brings back many notebooks full of and all those kind of
right. I still have the muscle memory from the PlayStation 2 controller.
Yeah. So if you're playing with a cheat code, what is the point? Well, this goes to mine, and that is Contra, right? And being able to get the 30 lives in Contra, because as a kid, trying to beat the whole game with 3 lives, that seemed almost impossible for a little bit. Yeah. We got the BFG, getting that, and Victor. I'm not a big person for not using cheat codes since a 60 KDR player. So, yeah, I think this is interesting because we got a wide range of thoughts and views and opinions on this. But I think it depends on the game and how much time you have. Because the one game that scarred me, which I wish I figured out a cheat code for, was The Lion King on SNES. Fun fact. The second level always got me every time.
Game? The side scroller? Yeah. I know that game.
Yeah, that was too hard for me. I can probably not beat it today as an adult either. But I digress on that fact because we have an interesting conversation today. And where's that conversation coming? Well, to figure out where we're going, we have to figure out where we've been. So, Russ, where have we been in the last week?
Last week, our topic was it's time to detect with AWS DLP solutions. No worries if you missed last week's episode. This week will be something new. And also we try to go over everything so that way, even if you don't miss, or even if you do miss an episode, it's not really super important. Every episode can be its own thing. And this week, our episode is up, down, left, right, encrypt, deliver, AWS secure messaging tools. So super excited about that. I think this is an interesting topic that doesn't really get talked about a lot. So super excited.
Yeah, exactly. And that's some of the fundamental items that we want to get into, because it's just like you said, sometimes it gets overlooked for some of the other items of security. And kind of what we want to go to is touching upon those nuances, right? That help build out your overall target state security strategy, as well as the solutions, outcomes, and everything that you need to help secure your environment. So with that being in mind, you start to think about, hey, what are some of the security fundamentals when it comes to messaging? That's a key component, right? So what we want to do is provide that comprehensive overview of some core principles that help to underpin messaging in the cloud environments, right? Then we want to help, let's say, understand queuing, right? So there are a couple of different services, SQS, SNS, Event Bridge, Kinesis. They all use queuing in some manner, form, shape, and we want to highlight some of, the different strengths, some of the limitations, some optimal use cases, things of that nature, right? And we have a very important question. Which console you play? Yes, the original Nintendo, as I date myself. And the reason why my hands hurt today. So, yeah, thank you for that, Mel. And as we start to go through those different items, then we start to delve into some real world applications, right? How do you implement secure messaging patterns? And then taking it one step further beyond, how do you kind of build upon this? How do you have, let's say, a playful but powerful framework? And how do you say playful in that manner? Well, stick around and you'll find out. So as you start to delve into this and kind of understand where we're going, I feel like what we have to do is start off with a little bit of a warm-up, a teaser. And what may that be? Well, that's going to be a fun poll. So feel free in the chat to put 1, 2, 3, or 4 to understand what your current messaging challenges are. So I think this is an interesting one to start off with.
Definitely.
Yeah. So Russ, where are you going first?
I think in this case, it would be leveling up security. I'm coming from my background, which is the customer incident response team. So when I see issues with SQS, I'd say 99 out of 100 times it's someone using SQS for spam emails to be able to use a good reputable domain. And so usually the SQS is more of the end state. And so it's who has access to that SQS. Are you doing the right things to prevent admin credentials from being compromised? And are you using a specific workflow for SQS, that uses temporary credentials instead of hard-coded credentials? It's going to be all of those things that really, help prevent some of those issues, specifically with, using the phishing attempts and stuff like that. So just because I see that most often, that is why I put that as my answer.
Yeah.
Hey,
and that's
someone agreed with me, so that's cool.
Yeah. And I think that's an important part to think about, right? So the security aspect, and kind of my mind conflicts between 1 and 2, just because one of the things is battling with the scale. And what I mean with that is when you look at customers, and if they have, let's say, a control tower deployment and they have a centralized logging account, sometimes they want to dump that into a third party, let's say, data lake type of solution. Think of like the Cribble or something along those lines. Then if you are using SQS, now they're trying to figure out, how do we scale this? Because you have all these logs coming in to your centralized logging account, and then maybe you have to do that integration with SQS. So now you're starting to get into those areas of, hey, I have to understand how this is going to scale within my environment, and also how am I going to manage this? Right? So it's a couple of different items. So yeah, I think it also touches upon the integration side of the house too. So yeah, but feel free to continue to drop in the chat. What are your feelings today, right? And as well as saying, hello to Schizo. How are you doing today? Right. So I think the place to start with today is kind of taking it back to those fundamentals and understanding, okay, what are some of the encryption options for messages? So first you think of TLS for in transit, and then you think of something like KMS for at rest, right? Simple encryption. You start to go down that path, then you figure out, okay, TLS or transport layer security, it implements across the different AWS messaging services. And it helps to secure, as I mentioned, the data in transit. So think of anything from Cipher Suite options to certificate management. All these components come into play with some TLS. And then at data at rest, your mind should start to go to KMS, right? And that has integration with the messaging services as well. So if you have to follow any type of requirements, compliance standards, organizational policies, best practices, KMS, dive a little bit deep into it and figure out what envelope encryption and all these other methodologies are, because that's a whole deep dive, a whole side quest, a whole episode by itself. But yeah, I think it also goes down to authorization, authentication, and accounting, right? AAA. That's another key security basic and fundamental that you should start to understand as you start to go down this messaging route, we'll say, right? So with authentication, if you're thinking in the AWS world, you're thinking of IAM role-based access, SDS with temporary credentials. You're thinking maybe even service-specific authentication mechanisms. You could start to go through Cognito and a whole other things, but I digress, because the next thing is authentication. Oh, no, not authentication, authorization. The A's always get me because I always pronounce them differently, right? You see what I did there? But when you start to go, one day Russ is going to laugh at my dad jokes, but authorization.
I always laugh at the dad jokes. They kill me. I try so hard not to bust out and ruin your whole speech, but
yeah,
man, it gets me.
You got to pepper it in a little bit, right? Just
a
little bit of seasoning, a little spice, something nice. As we start to think of authorization, and you think of policy types, right? Resource-based policy, identity policies, and condition keys with fine-grained access controls. So things like that. And then the last part is the accounting part, right? So you can showcase this with something like CloudTrail integration or CloudWatch metrics or something along those lines, right? And you want to look at how all of these come into play, especially from a messaging standpoint when you're trying to do everything securely, right? And the last piece that I would say helps to build out the fundamental circle is figuring out what are actual security patterns and what are anti-patterns. These are very important to understand, those different concepts. Why? Well, because when you think of security patterns, at message level encryption, you want to make sure that one, least privilege queue access is there. You want to think of the dead letter Q, security configurations, VPC endpoint, isolation, all these different parts of the security patterns themselves. And then anti-patterns is, well, neglecting message level stuff, right? So encryption, inadequate secrets management, so on and so forth. You kind of see where it's going. So those are some fundamental pieces that you should start to go down, because when you get to the other side of securing your environment, if you have anti-patterns in place, usually that's what sends you on a first-class trip to Russ's world, right? Russ's world, coming to you this fall. But Russ, what have you seen when it comes to kind of some of the anti-patterns and how people are leveraging the messaging services?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways that people kind of leverage those. I don't see nearly as much of it, mostly just because of my day-to-day interactions with customers. But for sure, as I was talking about earlier, the most common way I see them is being used for phishing. And so, anti-patterns, as far as, in this specific scenario, what an attacker would be looking for is for access to the queue itself, right? And then they're also looking to see how much you use it, because if you don't use it at all and it's also not locked down, then they know they've got a prime target, right? You don't use it, so and it's not locked down, so they can completely do things, and you won't even realize until either like Cost Explorer shows you a spike, or you get some sort of notification based off of using an unused service in your account. But you have to set those up. And so I think a lot of the time there are these services that aren't set up, which attackers will take advantage of, right? So for this specifically, usually the phishing emails, so they have a huge list of emails that they're targeting, and they'll send those out, usually extremely high numbers that will, completely just introduce all sorts of craziness to the cost and to the service itself. And especially if you already have, like, say, a small amount, like, for example, like automated customer receipts or something like that, where you are sending out a low level amount of emails. Those can also be severely hampered just because of the way that the queue works, especially when you're doing something like, we'll get into the queues a little bit later, but for this specific example, like the first in, first out queue. So if they all of a sudden drop 60,000 emails in front of your queue, then you have to wait for all 60,000 of those to be confirmed sent before you're able to get to whatever email you're sending to your customers. So there's a lot of different little things. And I think I kind of answered the question. I'm not going to lie, a little bit forgot what the question was.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's what I've seen personally.
Yeah, and I think that's important to call out the different types of usage, right? Because when you start to get to the point of, hey, what's happening within my queues, right, that are causing some type of issues, some types of, I would say, blowups, right? Because now you start to get to a point where it's hindering the service that you're providing to your customer. And if you don't have the correct security mechanisms in place, you think of TLS and things of that nature, where you have something in transit and then you have it at rest. Now, if you're sending something, let's think of, hey, maybe you're scanning, to your point, receipts or something along those lines, with maybe it has sensitive information inside of it. Now you have a man in the middle that can intercept that piece. Right?
Or password resets.
Yep, exactly. And that is very important. And that's why you have to consider these kind of things when it comes to your environment, right? So understanding your overall message, the security headers, the attributes, all these different items are good pieces of the puzzle, right? So I think it's a good place to start to delve into, right? When you're thinking about what my overall security posture is, because now you have to figure out, all right, if I'm going to be sending something out, to your point, password resets, how am I going to do it within my organization? Is it through via email? And how am I sending it out, right? That could be something simple that can take hours and hours of planning, right? But what you want to make sure is you have the foundational pieces and structures in place. So one of the things that Schizo says, I would go with LIFO instead of FIFO, right? So last in, first out, opposed to first in, first out. So that's an interesting thing, because if you think of last in, first out, well, what about that person in queue? I always think of like traffic when it comes to this, where it's just like, oh, you're the last one. All right, you're the first out. So it all boils down to kind of how you're thinking of what you're using in terms of your overall approach to your security within your environment and just handling messages, because certain applications, they might need that for particular reasons. But I think part of it is just understanding the queues as a whole, right? So, Russ, if we were to think of the battle of the queues, where would we start with this?
So your two, I would say, standard queue types would be your SQS standard and then the first in, first out. You can do a last in, first out, but the use case is so specific. It's really for things where, for example, new tasks will take a higher priority. So I would say that's more of like a when your workloads are communicating with systems that maybe throughput constrained, and you want those newer tasks to be higher in the priority queue. But for the most part, it's usually standard versus first in, first out. So there's a lot of differences. Basically, we have first in, first out does ensure that there's no duplicates. So there's no it's exactly once for the delivery, as opposed to standard queue, which is at least once, but is sometimes capable of providing duplicates. So that is like one of the big things is delivery guarantee. Well, actually, first off, let me just go to the ordering of the queue itself. First in, first out is strict with first in, first out, where the standard queue is more of a best effort as far as like the actual ordering itself. So the message order is not guaranteed. If that's important, say for a use case where messages should be in a specific order, you can't guarantee that with the standard queue, but you can with the first in, first out. And so because of the strict ordering, that allows for that level of granularity, which you don't really get with the standard.
And it's funny. One of the ways that somebody told it to me, and I kind of remember from there, is if you were to put in a metaphor, when you think of, let's say, a standard SQS queue, it's kind of like a busy food court, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where you have multiple lines, different customers. Sometimes people get served out of order. Someone who just arrived might get their order first because they have a sandwich or something along those lines that was faster. So it's efficient for handling those large crowds quickly with less organization, opposed to first in, first out, which is more of like a bank line, right? So it's just that single line. Everyone stands there organized, going to look at the $10 that they have in their accounts, like those kind of things, right? So that's kind of how I always thought about it, that it was a very, oh yeah, makes perfect sense now kind of thing.
That's a great example, and I'm definitely stealing that for the future. But yeah, that's actually, I was just about to go into that point, is for throughput, standard queue does better with higher loads, where first in, first out is limited. And they say it's limited with higher throughput specifically because it is so strict in the queue. And so sometimes if you are waiting on a message, it could be the last message that was sent, but was not confirmed, delivered, and that could cause issues with the rest of the queue. So because of that, it is more, I guess, time and resource intensive, the higher you scale it. So the first in, first out and the last in, first out are more for specific use cases. And if you're looking for more specific requirements, that's definitely, looking at what your use case is to fit which kind of queue you'd want to go with. So that's the first in, first out, I'd say it's more used for things that are message order and avoiding duplicates are extremely important. So like financial transactions, you don't want erroneous extra messages, so like getting 2 confirmation emails when you ordered one thing, creates a lot of confusion, and then they're going to have to call your customer support because they're like, well, I didn't pay for this twice, did I just wanted to order the one. So a lot of things like that where it has a use case. You just have to look at what you're trying to do with the SQS in order to choose the appropriate queue. Based on the queue, you might have some different methods for kind of securing those, but we'll kind of get into real world applications a little bit later.
Yeah, exactly. And you touched upon a couple of different things, and I think are important is just one, knowing the differences between the different queue types, right? Because that helps you to pick what am I going for within my application or my workloads and things of that nature. And that's an important part to consider, because
Definitely.
Not everything gets applied the same way in every environment. I know it sounds strange to say out loud, but that's why we often say, hey, architecture is really great, especially when you build it out ahead of time and then you do threat modeling and you kind of understand the workflows. It's for this reason. You're trying to cut off some of the potential threats. And what a potential threat is, could be a bottleneck, right? If you take that queue approach in your head where, can my application handle the food court approach of just multiple lines, multiple customers getting served, maybe out of order, or does it need to handle things one at a time because it kicks off other maybe event-driven workflows? And that's where you start to kind of iron things out a little bit, right?
Yeah,
so you just want to maintain that security across your architectural types, right? So
yeah. And the big thing, as far as like the security of the different queues goes, it's really just the permissions themselves. So like a queue level permission, like for this queue itself, or message level permissions. So that's going to be like the big factor as far as the security concern goes. And then there's a lot of further capabilities after that. So like, for example, with the SNS, first in, first out, you have other options such as, like security features. So there's message deduplication, message ordering. You can filter based off of attribute or content, and is fairly easily integrated within your existing security controls. So there's a lot that is capable, with these services. And so once you actually look into what they're capable of, you can really fine grain, your filtering or your permissions, especially if you're going to start doing things like attribute-based filtering. You can say set permissions based on that attribute or something along those lines. So there is a lot that you can do to really narrow down the permissions that everyone has. So that way it's kind of a bit more standardized, a bit less accessible from that perspective. And then
and just really quick, Victor says time intervals for exchange or settings, etc. Yeah, that's another important part, right? As you start to go down. So I know, Russ, you probably have a couple of things for that. Is just time management, right? How things are going to stay and how long they're going to stay.
Absolutely. Which could be also an issue for your domain reputation. Because if you are constantly sending things out within a certain amount of time limit or time frame, rather, you can get dinged on your domain reputation. So, there's a lot of things to consider, with email. So, yeah. So let's see. We also have some EventBridge security integrations. So like basically using the filtering on the like within your messaging app, You can use those for resource-based policies. You can even put in protection for your schema for your emails as well. So that way, an attacker can't just come in and just completely edit your scheme for mass emails. Definitely don't want anything like that. You can also put in rule-based security. So EventBridge can do some event pattern matching, especially when you're looking at a high number of emails. That sort of thing is super useful. And then it can even do in EventBridge cross-account event routing, which I think is super helpful to be able to kind of, say if you're using an account specifically for messaging, you can still have that tied back to another account or your AWS organization. So there's a lot of different integrations, between EventBridge and some of the other security tooling compared or when using your messaging with these security tools. So there you can, getting into say access policy in the different messaging services. So there's resource policy capabilities. You can integrate with IAM policies, cross-service permissions. So there's a lot that can be integrated, used for security with your messaging apps. It's a little bit of kind of just using your regular best practices, but with a specifically for messaging. So it's just a couple of extra things that you would have to consider for actually securing your queue.
Yep. And we have a question from Schizo who says, so is EventBridge just a bus? Well, I would say yes, EventBridge is a bus because EventBridge allows for the implementation of event-driven architectures, right? So think of it this way. You have a central hub that receives events from all of the different sources. You have your publishers and subscribers, and you also have different routing rules and mechanisms. You could drop off different things. And that's kind of where it starts to go down the route of understanding the architecture of what you're trying to achieve, because leveraging something like EventBridge can help you move towards that event-driven, because if something happens within your environment, right, you have the different types of buses within EventBridge, right? You think of your default within AWS services, you think of your third-party integrations or your partner event buses, and then you have custom, right? So if you have your own application, and each of those can help drive and allow the different ways to organize and manage your event flows. So when you think of EventBridge, there's a couple different components, but yeah, it can be an event bus that helps drive not just your security posture, but just your overall applications workflow. So thank you for that question.
Yeah. It's an event bus or pipelines, right?
Yeah, so, exactly.
Yeah. So it's mostly just an event bus.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that also brings us to a good point, right? Because one of the pieces that you always want to think about is, one, how you can get a little closer to understanding the different components of what makes up all of these different services. But to do so, you often have to think about what came before. What legends have you heard about using something like EventBridge in different pieces of the environment? Well, luckily we have a segment called As SideQuest Legend Has It. So, as SideQuest Legend has it, and I think this is a good time to, one, take that step back, and two, start the good old theme of side quests. So we like to explore customer scenarios. And with those customer scenarios, we go with the theme topic. And what is today's topic? Well, messaging. So let us think about an industry or organization that has, let's say, a ton of different pieces of the puzzle when it comes to, let's say, messaging. And that's financial services, right? Because you think of all the different pieces of the puzzle. Now, let us say our fictitious financial technical organization. Let's go FinTech and Express, right? Express makes it fancy. So when we're managing and modernizing, think of this customer environment. They have messaging infrastructure on AWS. They have development teams that maybe are actively using SQS or SNS for transaction processing, right? Or notifications, or maybe inter-service communications. And this is why we go with the financial services, because it has a lot of stuff baked into the different platforms. So now, think of this same organization. Maybe they implemented some basic encryption. Maybe they have some access controls. Or maybe they also have a lack of visibility into their security monitoring as a whole. All of these may be possible. But I think to set up this side quest, we have to think about the sensitive information, the financial data, which is a big part of the puzzle. So, and to do so, let us explore with our good old SideQuest board. And if this is your first time, the SideQuest board is a visualization of our customer scenario. So we have our authenticated user, our person who's supposed to get this message. And since we're talking about messages, let's move somebody in between our AWS environment and our individual. So when you're thinking of all these different pieces of the puzzle, and since it's a message service, I think it's only appropriate that we carve out SQS on a Post-it note.
I was so excited about that.
We're innovating with that, right? It plays into the whole theme, because you know what often happens is some individual, I'll move the arrow a little bit closer over here. Hey, somebody might be sitting in between, right? If you don't have the proper encryption, the proper visibility, or the understanding of how your message is going to go from over here, from your security user, to your AWS environment over here, there's a couple of different components that come into play. Right? We talked about different pieces of the puzzle, right? And one of those pieces could be something like your VPC. How is data being passed, right? Is this something that's moving between two different applications internally, or between two different VPCs? So let us take this step back and say, hey, maybe we have some type of secure connection within our VPC, right? That kind of boots the people who are trying to intercept these messages a little bit. So I think the important part to understand is, if something is happening within the environment, we want to make sure that, one, least privilege is followed, two, that we have the proper AWS tool sets, but three, the most important question, and I pose this to Russ: if your queue needs a sidekick, what companion service would you choose for it?
I would probably go with CloudWatch, also known as the Observer. For me, in this case, I think monitoring would be important. You don't know you have an issue until you have something monitoring the performance or metrics of your queue. So I think you can't really know if there's a problem until you observe it. So I'm going to go with CloudWatch.
Okay, so we are watching our clouds. Right? I'm sure nobody made that joke before, but as we start to say, hey, we want to have some observability from the observer service itself, CloudWatch, now we start to think about all the challenges that the organization has faced. And some of those challenges came from blind spots in their message security. So failing to implement those comprehensive monitoring controls. You're thinking of maybe ad hoc queue access controls. And that's kind of where you want to kind of focus on a little bit, right? What is the overall least privilege approach that you can take? What are the identity principles that, kind of have to be in place within your environment to understand?
Real quick, before we move on, I just wanted to just call out that we did have an answer. We did have a DLQ in the comments.
Yes,
so
that is a good place to go with the DLQ. So with the dead letter queue, now you start to think of, hey, what is it? Well, let's take the quick second to say, well, it's where the messages go that couldn't be processed successfully, we'll say, after a certain number of attempts. Where does it go? I call it the shadow realm. Some people call it the dead letter queue. Tomato, tomato. But so all these are pieces of the puzzle that you want to understand of how you kind of proceed forward. And especially if you don't have the insights and you think about the challenges that were expressed in this customer scenario, well, let's think of it this way. If your messaging queue was a video game character, what type of video game character would it be? Russ. And feel free to put it in chat as well.
So I'm going to steal one of your examples, which would be Kirby. And Kirby, because it sucks up and absorbs all of the metrics. So I think the metrics are, in this case, what my queue would use for a video game character.
Yeah.
Pulling in all of that data.
Yes. And with that, the board expands, right? So as you start to think about all these different pieces of the puzzle, now, if you have all your metrics being absorbed, if you think about, hey, maybe you're constantly chasing issues like Pac-Man was behind you, right? You start to think of, what are the solutions that I can take? Well, if you have something like VPC endpoints, well, now you can establish private communication challenge. Or if you have something like maybe KMS encryption, that's another mechanism that you could put into place to help better secure your environment and your sensitive pieces of data and information that you don't want to be interrupted or, taken. So all these are pieces of the puzzle. And to, again, Schizo's point is dead letter queues, right? Establishing a secure message failure handling mechanism, because that's something that may be overlooked. And it could present a problem when you have these problematic messages, right? So having those mechanisms in place, very important pieces of the puzzle. What also you have to think about is, how do we take this and continue our real world example? Well, easiest way to do that is to hit the pause game button, or as I call, Zach Moore's timeout. No, if we take that step back to think about it, I think an important piece of this is, what are the real world applications? Because sometimes it's hard to visualize, and that's why we like to come up with some analogies, some metaphors, and everything in between, like the food court example or the bank example. But now, if you are a financial service, we use that specifically. Why? Because there's a lot of stuff that goes into financial services backend, right? Two, you start to think of the architectures, right? When you think of something like a financial services company, organization, you start to think of, okay, they have to follow stringent security demands for financial transactions. Okay? When you send, let's say, a payment or something along those lines, you want to make sure that it's sent securely and fast. Okay? And if it's failed, there can be ramifications if it doesn't get through. How do you handle that? So you want to make sure that you have some way to handle these different mechanisms. So think of the SQS, the FIFO queues, you think of deduplication, and you start to think of, okay, how can we also prevent the cost creep up from all these transactions? Because there could be tons and tons and tons of them happening. And Also, for the compliance folk out there, let's say PCI DSS as one of the pieces that you want to adhere to. So all these are pieces of the puzzle. And it just doesn't stem from financial services. You also have healthcare as well. So there's HIPAA compliant notification workflows as well that you want to be adhered to or think about. Because if you have PHI and you're sending sensitive bits of information, you want to make sure that end to end it's secure. So data in transit, data at rest, and everything that comes in between those two items. So part of, and I always like to call it, shared responsibility model is understanding what the shared responsibility model is, especially when managing and handling your data. So going down that same methodology, I think it's important to kind of iron out the different ways that, one, data leaves and comes into your organization. So we spoke about DLP, and you see kind of the path. But also, what are the mechanisms in your holistic security strategy? I think that's the important part. What do you think, Russ?
Definitely. I think, the holistic approach, definitely my preferred. Trying to, think of it as a piece of a greater whole, and just seeing kind of how those, different controls and policies really interact with, every service. And I think that also just because I know who you are as a person, tagging. I think everyone should implement a tagging system for their emails.
Yeah,
and their keys.
Tagging is something that if you're not doing today, you should be doing, and dive deep. As long as you kind of remember least privilege, least privilege, least privilege. We say it every episode 3 times for the people on the other side of the interwebs. But I think the important piece to understand as well is, hey, what is some of your concerns? What keeps you up at night? What's your primary security concern? And we have the gaming analogy that backs this up, right? Is it broken shield with access control, rusty armor, outdated security, missing weapons, lack of tools, empty inventory, resource issues? So, Russ, where do you go?
I go immediately to broken shield. So access control. If people, if your concern is your emails or data or content, being released to people that it's not supposed to be, you want to make sure that the people that are supposed to be able to access that are, and the people who do not need to access that are not. So I think this is, I feel like one of the most basics of security, and it just isn't, as a big a priority as I'd like to see it. So I think access control, especially because of, as I was talking about earlier, one of the most common ways for me to see issues with SQS is because of access control. So long-lived credentials that get compromised or exposed, and then, if it has permissions for SQS or heaven forbid, an admin credential or a root credential, then they have access to everything. So I'm going to go with access control.
Yeah. And it's hard to make arguments against the access control. But as always, we like to hear from you out there. So feel free to put 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the chat to pick your item.
Get that nice little chart up here.
Yeah. And I think the other piece to think about, I always go to kind of the missing weapon, right? And when I say lack of tools is sometimes people understand that they have to use identity mechanisms, but they're not using the complete tool set. So leveraging something like IAM Access Analyzer, for example, to make sure that you understand what is out there in terms of your permissions within your environment, right? I think that's a piece of the puzzle. Last week, we spoke about something like Macy as part of your DLP strategy. So without a tool like Macy, you wouldn't necessarily have that at your disposal from your side to say, hey, this is sensitive information, unless you went through and kind of did it one piece at a time. But I think that also values us taking that next step back and thinking about the overall messaging. And when I say overall messaging is, how do we apply some of the title into our security posture? And when you think of title, what am I saying? Well, how do you apply the up, up, down, down, left, right piece of this into your security posture, where you have these particular mechanisms? Russ, if we were to break it down into a couple of arrows, where do we start off?
Yeah, so we would start off with VPC endpoint isolation. We kind of already went over the endpoints. If you're looking to do, you said it earlier, right? If you're looking to provide that to a specific location, private, keeping it out of the way. So I definitely agree with the private network controls for the VPC endpoint isolation. And then I would go with, IAM permission boundaries. Those give you more granular access control, allows you to set up permission boundaries, service-specific permissions, cross-account access for, like I said, if you have an account specifically for messaging, you're still able to bring that back to maybe your security account. And then obviously least privilege implementation for the permission boundaries. So, don't forget that, because, Tristan will show up out of nowhere and yell at you. And then, right. So you don't want to anger Tristan. Then we have the DLQ implementation, which is the dead letter queue or shadow zone, or whatever you prefer to call it. You can configure the dead letter queue, retry policies, add monitoring and alerts with it. Then there's message filtering rules. I'm going to go through these kind of fast because we just don't have a lot of time left. So the message filtering rules, you can filter based off of the content patterns, attribute based. You can create different policies and use policy enforcement. Then we have cross-account controls. So, resource sharing, cross-account roles, security boundaries, audit trails, stuff along those lines. And then we have our encryption everywhere, end-to-end message protection. So you integrate with KMS, you can have client-side encryption, you can rotate the keys, you can get the encryption context, and then our very last one is our start and select, our deployment checklist and validation. So like a security configuration validation, permission verification, confirming that you've isolated the network and the VPC. There's encryption validation, monitoring the setup. So there's a bunch of different checklists and different checks on that to ensure before you can absolutely do an SCP, depending on your environment and what you're looking to do on it. I think Tristan has more to say about that.
Yeah, and I think the way, kind of why we weren't initially thinking of it as the up, down, down piece is because we're trying to get a little bit more of a targeted guardrail, right? So SCPs and permission boundaries, both guardrails, but SCPs are more of a broader guardrail, right? Can you get a little bit more in there? Yes. But when you're thinking of permission boundaries, now they're targeted towards specific IAM entities. So that's kind of where we were going with that. And if you caught it, up is VPC, IAM boundaries up, and then down, DLQ, down, message filtering rules. We're kind of going that cross account. It's a little inside joke, right?
I know. Right? I kind of rushed that part because we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah. Exactly. And these are the hidden context, right? This is for the post-credit scene. But I think since we don't have that much time, first, Thank you, Mel, for that question. But two, I think a good part of this is jumping into, hey, how do we go on something of, the quest? First, you do certificates, and then you go on a knowledge quest, right? We're speeding through it because it's fun to do sometimes, right? Speed run, knowledge. But
Speed
also,
run, using all those cheat codes.
yeah, exactly. See? Russ was paying attention to the whole thing that we
Circling
were trying
back,
to bring in. See?
The themes always work out in the end.
Yeah. That's what we tell ourselves, at least. Feel free to disagree in chat. But we also like to build aura.
I actually won't be taking any negative criticism at this time, so thank you.
It's like, thank you, good night. But part of it is going on a knowledge quest is essentially, hey, what are these pieces after that you can dive into on your own and let us know on, reach out to us and say, hey, I went on this kind of knowledge quest to figure out what exactly you were talking about when you delved into these different topics. So we always approach it in three different ways. From an L100 level, if we're talking about Qs, how are you a Q apprentice? Well, part of that stems from kind of figuring out what a Q is, I would say, and what better way to start than the documentation from the AWS perspective of figuring out, hey, what's the basic of an SQS architecture? That's kind of how you start to delve into it. Hey, what is some SNS security? Where does, the shared responsibility model pop into place? And these are the kind of steps that you start to build up your security reps until, one, you figure out, hey, I kind of know this. And two, you kind of level up to a pattern ranger. We use pattern ranger on another, I would say it's not a cartoon, kids show. I'll go with kids show, right? So part of it is understanding, hey, how do I transform myself into somebody who understands a little bit more, right? And how do I understand, hey, how do I filter out messages? How do I get to a point where I kind of narrow down what I'm taking in and having in place certain things like the DLQ and things of that nature? How do I have some example policies that I can use that has something like the specifications to, here's the action, here's a resource that can take this? Because understanding these different components is important to, one, your target state security strategy. I always say it 3 times, sprinkled throughout the episode as well, if you've been paying attention. But also, how do you become a messaging legend, right? These are all components of building up one piece at a time. Very important part, the SRA. Go through it, understand it. It has all of the cheat codes inside of it in order for you to build up kind of your environmental security posture in a fast manner, because these are, I would say, tried and true methods of helping organizations and customers build up their overall knowledge. And then I would say go on some workshops. This one in particular is fun, the Wild Rides, where you have decoupled microservices. And what do you have inside of it? Well, figuring out how to create an SNS topic and subscription and things of that nature. But we'll take it one more time to the top with this epic picture, because it is a great picture. And if you take away one thing from this stream, is that, hey, this was a fun picture to look at. And also, the other thing I would say that you should take away is
to create an incident response plan.
Exactly. And also, when you do that, you build up your experience points one point at a time, because when you do that, you level up not only yourself, but your overall organization security posture. So until next time, thank you for joining all of the people who commented in chat and all the people who are going to view this after. We appreciate you so much. So happy Monday and take care.
Have a good one, guys.